Welcome to Actually You Can, where we explore stories of inspiration, resilience, and the power of embracing a purposeful life. I'm your host, Myth, and in today's episode, I'm thrilled to have the incredible Gracie Elvin joining us. As a women's cycling expert with nearly a decade of experience as a professional road cyclist, Gracie has achieved remarkable feats in her career. She has claimed 2 Australian road titles, reached the podium at prestigious Tour of Flanders, and proudly represented Australia at the World Championships, Commonwealth Games, and Olympics. But Gracie's impact extends far beyond her athletic achievements. She is a true leader and advocate, standing up for what she believes in and earning the respect and admiration from the cycling community and beyond. In this episode, we dive deep into Gracie's journey on and off the bike, her experiences, and the lessons she has learned along the way. Get ready for an incredible conversation filled with inspiration, laughter, and insights that will leave you motivated to embrace your own big life. Because actually, you can. Hi, Gracie, and welcome to the show.
I'm Myth. Well, I've known you for a very long time, but this is the first time I've been on your podcast, so I'm super excited to be here.
And you've let the cat out of the bag a little bit. So yes, we do know each other, which is why instead of asking you to introduce yourself, I took the liberty of writing a bio for you. And so I'd love to kick off the show by sharing a little introduction I put together and just hearing your thoughts on it. So when I thought about Gracie, I was like, how can I describe Gracie? And so I've come up with the following. I said, you're a cycling expert, having cultivated your experience through nearly a decade as a professional road cyclist. During your illustrious career, you've secured 2 Australian road titles, achieved a podium finish at the renowned Tour of Flanders, and proudly represented Australia at the World Championships, Commonwealth Games, and Olympics. Beyond your exceptional athletic achievements, you have emerged as a true leader, a beacon of inspiration, and an advocate. Your unwavering commitment to stand up for what you believe in has earned your respect and admiration, not only in the cycling community, but those around you. You have an adventurous spirit that knows no bounds, exploring new territories both on and off the bike. Your resilience and stoicism have been tested and refined, while your sharp wit and comedic charm bring joy and laughter to those around you. Above all, you have committed to embracing a mindful approach to living a big life, nurturing the ability to listen to your instincts and live with purposeful intention. So, how does that sound?
Wow, I got goosebumps. That was really sweet and almost made me want to cry. Yeah, I don't think you missed much there. Definitely wouldn't have tooted my own horn as much as that, but that made me feel good.
And to be fair, that's why I decided to write it for you, because I feel like there's more to you and you're a very humble person. So I thought I'd open up just by that, because I feel like we can dig into a lot more of it from here. So obviously, as I mentioned before, you spent a decade as a road cyclist. So I feel like it's only natural that we start by looking into that. So I'd love if you wouldn't mind sharing just your journey as a cyclist and how you got into the sport and your progression through the sport as well.
Yeah, so you're pretty much right there in that it was a decade of being a pro athlete, but I really count day one as getting on the bike as the start of the career. And I really like to think of it, it was a 20-year career. And the moment that I stepped on my bike, when my dad set one up for me, I was a bit at a loose end with activities. I've always been super sporty and love being active, and I would, run a lot, and I did little athletics. I did a bit of netball. I rode horses a lot. That's a whole other story that we could probably talk about as well. But yeah, Dad was like, oh, what would you like me to set up Mum's old road bike for you, and we could go for a ride around the lake? That's Lake Burley Griffin for the Canberra people. And yeah, that day I was just like, that was really fun. Can I do more of that? And did a lot more of that, and evolved into a love and a passion, something I shared a lot with my dad and my mum. She was a big part of it too. And I think from pretty early on, Dad, who knows a lot about endurance sports, said to me, okay, this is great. We can enjoy it and we can ride a lot. But if you want to be good, then it's going to take you 10 years to be good. And then it's going to take you another 5 years to actually do do well. So he really set me up from a very, very young age to appreciate the joy of it just for that. And if I wanted to be good, that it was about patience. And so that's why I think of it as a 20-year career, because I really had that instilled in me from, pretty much the start.
Wow. What great expectations. And it takes a very unique individual to know that it's going to take them 10 plus years to be good at something to actually sign up for it. So, what was the appeal for you to embark on that journey despite what could be seen, especially at that age, as a very long timeline?
Yeah, there's it. Looking back, obviously, you have so much more clarity in hindsight. So, I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. I've learned a lot, and I've probably changed a fair bit as well. But the core of me is still there, in that I love to see the world through not a child's eyes, but I like to see the world through imaginative eyes. And the bike is one of those things that you see the world at a very specific pace. And obviously, it feels amazing to be super fit. It feels amazing to go fast and be free. But I think there's something so unique about riding a bike, in that it's commuting, it's fun. There's whole different types of bikes you can ride. I did a lot of mountain biking, and that was super fun too. And you can share it. It's really social. You can do bunch rides. I got to ride with my dad for a really long time. I got to ride with people of all ages and abilities, and I literally got to see the world. I got to see Canberra a lot, and then I went further afield and I got to see Australia, and then I got to see the world. I got to see Europe and America and even parts of Asia on a bike. And that is so different to being in a car or walking. You're just seeing it at a really unique pace. And that's something I've always loved. So, it's not just about being in nature or going fast or being free. It's kind of like the whole combo deal.
I've never heard anyone describe their sport so beautifully. And because it was a sport and it was a career for you, and it's something that you had to work really hard to be at the level that you were at. And just to hear you explain it, it was also another beautiful vehicle for you to have an experience in life as well. And a lot of people, when they get to the end of their career in sport, go cold turkey on it. I know I was one of those people, and you've stayed connected to the bike, and I'd be interested to hear a bit more about why you stayed connected to the bike. Was it because of all the things that you've just mentioned?
Yeah, like it was a pure joy, and I guess it still is. And I think even if I couldn't articulate it, I felt that. And one of my goals in my whole career of racing at a high level was to leave still being in love with it, and still wanting to go for a ride with my dad and go riding with my friends. And, I got down to that pointy end of my career in 2020. That's a whole other long story of how I got to the point of deciding to retire. But something that was important to me was I didn't hate it. Like I hadn't gotten to that point of resentment that a lot of athletes get to. Not just bike riders, athletes of any sport. They get to that point where they just don't even want to look at that thing anymore. They want to look at the bike or the pool or whatever it was. And that was something that it was really important to me to still want to go be a bike rider. And I want to ride my bike until I'm not allowed to anymore, hopefully in my 80s.
And before we dig more into your cycling career, I'm curious, you mentioned how you used to ride horses before, and that was a bit of a story there. What is that story with horses?
Oh, did you ride horses as well? I have this memory that we were at Pony Club together. Yeah, that's
Yes.
right. I
Yeah,
wasn't
we
making it up.
definitely did.
Yeah, I remember, because I was like, the Galloways have such a good name for horse riding. Um, yeah, so I was one of those classic young girls that was obsessed with horses. Just I was a horse girl. I was a Pony Club girl. But I don't come from a wealthy family. Mum and dad, gave my sister and I everything that we ever wanted or needed, not in a spoiled way, but we didn't go wanting, but we certainly couldn't afford the horse life, and they still made it happen. And a family friend of mine, who I would have considered an auntie figure back then, taught me how to ride. And much like the first ride on a bike with dad, the first ride on a horse, I was probably about 8 or so. I just was like this is it. This is my thing for the rest of my life. Just having, being that little kid of always pointing out horses in the car, like to finally actually ride one and just being like, oh, this is the best day ever. And then that woman allowed me to ride her horses and look after her horses for quite a few years. And so that was an extreme privilege to have that opportunity and to have someone, this 9, 10, 11-year-old kid taking care of your horse. That's not that common either. And when I was about 12, I think, my parents managed to find a horse within their budget, and I think they bought him for $1,000, and he was what you would call a paddock basher. So he was like an old thoroughbred that had kind of been let to rot in the paddocks for a few years, and someone was trying to sell him. So they thought, oh, this could be good for Gracie. And in Canberra, we have a lot of public agistment, so it's a cheaper option to keep horses. So we kept him in a nearby paddocks, and I would ride my bike there every day with a big box on the back of the bike. And it was this awful old bike, and the panniers were so crap that the box that my dad had put on the panniers rack on the rear of the bike, because I'd put so much crap in there, so much like horse rugs and saddle and whatever I could put in there, it'd be too heavy, and the pannier thing would always fall off, and it would like push on the tire, and I would get so angry. I'd just be like, oh, I'd like want to shout, and just, classic teenager, just already angry at everything. But that was probably another way I got strong on the bike, because I had to ride with all of this gear on the bike so I could go to the horse. And then I would ride all day if I could, if I didn't have to go to school. And I just was obsessed. And we didn't buy a horse float, or couldn't really afford to track the horse anywhere. So I would only go to events that I could ride to. So I would always be making sure I wouldn't miss any events at the equestrian park nearby. I would go to pony club whenever I could. It was just my absolute love. And around that same time, I was picking up cycling as well. So I managed to balance the two for pretty much most of high school days. And got to that point where I was 17 or 18, and that was that decision I had to make of, a horse is a living animal, and it's a high maintenance living animal, and I'm not giving it that care and attention that I should be now. And I have to decide, because an athletic career is very time-based as well. You can't do it when you're older. You have to do it when you're youngish at least. I had to make that decision, and we sold the horse to another little blonde girl that was obsessed with horses. So that was sad. It was really sad, but I was also happy that someone else, that was me, that 10 years beforehand, could then experience that new joy. So that was also nice in a way, to be like, well, another little girl's going to get a lot out of him, and he was a beautiful horse in the end, and it's one of the loves of my life.
How wonderful. And like you said, it was a tough decision, and you really enabled through that tough decision to have a positive experience for someone else. And that's a really beautiful thing to do. And it's funny you mentioned it was the choice between developing as an athlete, as a cyclist, or horse riding. That was very similar to my journey. I asked my parents if they could buy me a horse at the time. I couldn't afford my own. And instead, my dad bought me a bike. So I was like,
that was smart. Enough. They were smarter than my parents.
Yeah, the justification was that the bike doesn't eat much. But I'm not sure about you, but I feel like I've spent, or at least my parents definitely helped me in the early stages, spent a lot on being able to travel the world and cycle.
Yeah. And that's another thing too. It's not a cheap sport to get into. And while I didn't come from a very super wealthy family, like in comparison, we are wealthy, like not everyone could be a cyclist, let alone ride a horse. So I'm well aware of my privilege. I'm very grateful for that, because it's tough to get into, and cycling requires a lot of equipment. So yeah, the bike doesn't eat anything, but it certainly still eats money.
Definitely. And the travel and all that sort of stuff. And so you've gotten to this point now where you've committed to your cycling career. Where does it take off from here?
Well, it's I wasn't a very good junior cyclist. So pretty much until I was about 18, I was coming almost last, if not last, at most levels of racing. So Luckily I loved it so much that it didn't really matter, and I was all about the personal improvements and the PBs, and I think I've always been like that because I have a lot of talent for sure and a lot of strengths, but they don't always come out in the things that I choose, like little athletics. I was pretty good at most of it, but not the best. And so, from a very young age, I love that little athletics is really personal best based. And I thought that was really helpful as a young kid, to go through that process, because that helped kind of set up that same mentality in a sport that wasn't about recording PBs like they do in those logbooks at Little Athletics. I had to kind of do an internal logbook, you could say, of like, oh, I did a little bit better today at X, Y, or Z. And that was still really satisfying. So yeah, the love, the social aspect, certainly finding a lot of peers with much similar mindsets and interests outside of school was helpful. I did struggle to connect with people at school. I had plenty of friends, but I never really felt that good in those situations. So it was also really nice to come to a different group of people and share that. And but also my parents made sure that school was the priority. So I'm also very grateful that I had that support. There wasn't pressure. I didn't have to do well. I just had to do it. I had to just get through school with pretty good grades and finish it. And that was the priority. And then if I wanted to still pursue the cycling, then I could go at it if I wanted after that. And that's what I did. So, about 18, I guess I didn't want to go straight into uni. So I did a personal trainer course, and that was pretty fun. That helped me get out of my shell because I was a really shy young person. I worked. It was great, flexible work. I could pretty much dictate my hours. So I would work as much as I could around training, could train heaps. And finally, I started seeing results. I finally wasn't getting dropped. I was finally starting to do okay at the races, and that was really motivating. And then I took a sidestep into mountain biking because of a couple of boys I was hanging out with, and one of them became a long-term boyfriend. And I kind of just fell into that. And at that time, there was a talent ID program called Dirt Roads to London. And that was geared at getting more women in Australia into mountain biking, with the hope that there would be someone at a good enough level to represent Australia at the London Games. And I was the minimum age to get into that. So I was the baby of the group, but I managed to get selected, and that was an awesome opportunity. I met some really amazing people that I'm still friends with to this day. I kind of finally got to be part of a kick-ass group of women that I'd kind of been craving. And probably because I was young, I wasn't a massive threat to them. So that probably helped as well. And yeah, I did mountain biking until I got quite good, and I managed to be selected for the national team in 2009. So I think I was about 20, and I was finally there. I'd made it. But because of some good advice from my dad and a couple of other key people over the years, I don't know if you can hear my cat. She's meow.
Just wants to be part of the fun.
Yeah. I was always given that advice, even if you've made the national team or made a pro team, you haven't made it. That's not making it. It's something to celebrate and enjoy, but you're not done. And so that was also a good mentality for me to have. And that was my first overseas experience. Finally, at age 20, I got to travel for almost a year with the national mountain bike team. And I'm also glad that I took that side step away from road riding at that crucial time in my life, because you see a lot of women aged about 18 to maybe 22, 23. And if they're in quite a structured sport environment and high pressure, it's just a tough time, a tough age. And I'm not going to say I wouldn't have survived, but I don't think I would have had a very good time, and I probably wouldn't have been ready for that kind of pressure at that age. So mountain biking was this pretty fun sport. We were still doing high level training and racing, but I was just with this really lovely group of people, an awesome coach, Neil Ross, that I learned so much from. So yeah, that really set up my pro road racing career in a way that I hadn't ever expected. But, that's life, isn't it? You never really take the road you plan to take.
And it's really interesting you touch on that age group around the 18s. I think it's a really challenging period of time for a lot of people. And that's often when you see a lot of the junior athletes drop out of the sport because there's competing demands showing up. And so it's really great to hear that you acknowledge that there could be challenges around that time and you chose an option that would keep things fun. I hesitate with the word fun because it's a lot of hard work. It's not all fun, but something that
Yeah.
enabled you to really experience joy throughout cycling as well. And so how did you go from mountain biking back to road? What was that transition?
There was a couple of catalysts. I'd always wanted to be a roadie. I wanted to go to the Tour de France, even though there wasn't a Tour de France for women. It was like, that was what I grew up watching. That was what I was passionate about. So that was kind of always in the back of my mind that I would get back there eventually. I was quite good at mountain biking, but I was never going to be a world beater. It just wasn't quite in my wheelhouse of physical capabilities. But I got really strong. I learned a lot of skills that really helped in road racing. And around that time, the Australian Sports Commission changed their funding models. And so I did 1 year with the national mountain bike team. And at the end of that year, they decided to pull a lot of funding from the sport because it wasn't really deemed a strong sport to get medals for Australia at the games. So that was very disappointing for a lot of people. And it was disappointing for me, but there was other people that it impacted a lot more. And that was really tough, including my coach. There was plenty of people left without jobs and not just athletes. So that was disappointing. No, that's a whole other story for the cycling politics followers. But I self-funded for another 2 years, and that's really expensive. I had some really great sponsors, some good equipment brands behind me. But ultimately, if you're doing it as a privateer, you're already at such a disadvantage, let alone being Australian. You don't have a big support network over there helping you at races. You're spending a lot of money and it's just tough. And then at the end of that second year of self-funding, I was doing everything I could to get selected for the World Championships. And I was told if you go to these races and get these results, then you'll qualify to go to Worlds. And I did that. And then they still didn't let me go to Worlds, even though I was buying my own ticket to get to Worlds. Like, it wasn't like they were putting up any money for me to go. It was all, even World Championships was self-funded. And I just got this shit. So, and another talent ID program was also coming up, and it was the infamous AIS Women's Road Selection Camp. So this camp was, it probably hung around for about 5 years. I did the second edition of it, and it's infamous because in the road cycling circles, it was a bit polarizing. The person in charge of that, who was the national coach at the time, decided he'd like to set up an SAS style survival camp that you could get eliminated from. So I did everything I could to get invited to this camp. I wasn't part of any state institutes at that time because the fact that I'd lost my AIS sponsorship also meant I lost my state sponsorship, which is also a whole other crap thing in that funding process. So they didn't really know who I was. Luckily, my coach was in the loop. He got me an invite. I went to this camp. It was a 10-day camp, approximately 20 challenges over 10 days. And every few days, they'd eliminate 4 or 5 people. And I did okay in the testing rounds, which is a lot of lab testing. They thought, oh, we'll just see what else she's got. And once we got into like the nitty-gritty of the challenges, some of the races, they took us to a local race that we had to race against the B grade men, and I won the whole race. And that was pretty awesome. That was like one of my career highlights. As
I remember that race actually.
Yeah. And I think the coaches were like, oh, okay, she does have something there, even though she's not like awesome in the lab. She's good enough, but she knows how to actually ride a bike and race a bike. And I got all the way to the end and I got a scholarship. So I got one of 3 scholarships, and about 20 people started that camp. So that was how I got my ticket back into road cycling. So I got to race with the road national team in 2012. And then I got signed from there to Green Edge, which is the Australian pro team. So yeah, then I spent 8 years there.
Wow. I'm keen to dig into a couple of things here. First, there seems to have been a couple of opportunities along the way to getting that contract with Green Edge where you could have been like, I'm done. You were doing everything necessary to be successful, yet there were still things getting in your way. What motivated you during that time to keep going?
Well, that's another good question. I think sometimes when you're young, you don't even think about motivation. You're just doing. And I think that was a bit of the case with me. Even though I wasn't like this amazing athlete, I just had this really inner knowing that I could be good. And I don't know if like it's an arrogance or it's like a naivety or pure hope, or it was probably just a combination of all of that, of just being like, this is what I want. And it wasn't like, I didn't think I'm going to be world champion. I don't think I ever thought that. It was just like, I want to be a professional and I just want to do well and I want to have fun and I want to be like my heroes. And unfortunately, a lot of those heroes were male cyclists. So it was nice to finally start making some female heroes once I started getting exposure to them. But I just wanted to ride fast. And I just knew that if I just kept plugging away at it, I could do it. So yeah. No, and I did get asked once, how much longer are you going to do this for? I had a couple of pretty serious crashes, some serious injuries there. And I just was almost taken aback that they were even asking me that. And I just realized that I also wasn't letting people know how much I wanted it, because my demeanor is actually quite, I don't know if I would say closed, but I think I'm a bit hard to read and I don't say a lot sometimes. And especially when I was younger, I wasn't super good at expressing my wants, needs, and emotions. And so I had a few learning moments like that when people would say, I didn't realize you wanted that, or why, how much longer, or what, and I would be surprised that they were even asking that, but then I would realize that I never really said it either. So that was also a good lesson to say things out loud.
And on that, you mentioned that you had this inner knowing that this is what you wanted and that you could be good. Did that carry through your entire career, or were there periods where you felt super confident, or when that was challenged, or was that feeling consistent throughout your career?
Yeah, I think the inner knowing probably never wavered. It was more just like confidence that did. I remember I was quite successful early on. Just after that selection camp, this same coach took me to the Oceania Championships purely so I would win the race, and I did win the race. And that was like the best feeling, not winning the race, but someone had taken me there to do that they believed that I could do that, because I'd been self-motivating for so long. To have someone else finally say it was awesome. And that whole year he was really in my corner, and that gave me a lot of confidence in myself. And then he kind of, that support ebbed away. He did support me for the rest of my career, but I was clearly the favorite that year of him. And so that really helped me. And I think then I could keep self-motivating after that. But so that was 2012. It wasn't until 2015 where I won my first pro race in Europe. So there was a good few years there where I just was so close, knocking on the door, doing all the right things, training hard, showing up to races, just doing whatever you need to do to be part of a pro team, be a good teammate, but also try and do well yourself. And I have this clear memory of that day that I won the race. Obviously, it's easier to remember because it was a lot of strong emotions that day, but I had this fan club, which is funny because cycling fans can be very passionate. And I had my own fan club, only consisted of about 4 or 5 people. So don't worry, it wasn't like a big club. But they always came to the races. They even put my face on an Aussie flag. It was so sweet and funny. But they would always be like, good luck, Gracie. And most of these people were Belgian or Dutch. And they'd always be like, good luck, Gracie. And I could just see that in their eyes, they just really wanted me to win for them. And I'd just gotten to the point where I was kind of like, I couldn't ever say it to them, but I just wanted to be like, just stop. Like, I'm no good. I can't win races. This is it for me. I'm just going to be a good support rider and just, like maybe I'm just not good enough to win races. And I remember thinking that so strongly that day that I was kind of like, I wish people would stop saying good luck because it doesn't feel good anymore. It feels like I'm letting them down all the time. And then I won the race, and it was like, more than anything, it was a relief. And that was also interesting to be like, okay, well, so many people say winning is joyful, and sure it is, but if it's more strongly a relief, then what does that tell you? And it took me a while to kind of figure that out, but just to realize that the journey was still more important. And like, I think you have to go through plenty of things to like understand the simple cliches are always the best. So true. That's why
Yeah,
they're cliches.
100%. It's interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, for those who aren't super familiar with cycling, it's a team sport, but still only one person wins. So, like every race, you're lining up against 100, 150 women. And at the end of the day, one person crosses the line first, but it's essentially a team effort to get there a lot of the time. And it's not like where you play a game of soccer and you have two teams and one team wins, one team loses. It's essentially one person crosses the line on behalf of the team, but it's still an individual victory. So to even get one win at a pro race is ridiculous. And I'm interested to hear, you mentioned that it was almost a relief to win. I'd love to dig into that a bit more. What was relieving about it, or what did you learn crossing the line?
Yeah, I think so many athletes feel it wasn't a unique feeling. Like winning's joyful, but I think most athletes would also relate to that feeling of relief because there's just so much pressure there, and mostly it's pressure from yourself. Like for sure, I have some pressure from the team. That's why they're paying you because you're supposed to win races. But like ultimately, it's just like you feel like you need to be validated, and ultimately that's kind of what sport is. It's a validation through achievement, and there's so many great things about sport, but there's also that challenge there of if you didn't win, you lost. And it's hard when you show up to races over and over and over again that you don't win to not feel a bit like a loser. And even though like that's also not the whole point of sport because there is so much emphasis put on winning, it's just a relief. And yeah, I think it was just like a good reminder to take the pressure off a bit. And I think just loosen that grip a little bit because that's, you can find that flow better when you're not as focused on the outcome.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier your dad saying that, when you get your pro contract, you're not done. I think to
Mm.
your point, winning a race doesn't mean that you're done and things are over. It's part of a longer journey, and whatever that journey looks like is up to you. And so I'm interested to learn more about that journey. What was some of the most memorable achievements that you have achieved on the bike, and what made them so significant?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about it recently. Like I do reflect on it regularly, um, especially now on the other side. And during my career, I even learnt that of when I was at the Olympic Games, I was literally an athlete wonderland. Like it's the pinnacle for almost every sports person to go to the Olympics, and it was super fun. Like it was awesome. But I kept looking around, and I was there for about 3 weeks. I was there for as long as you can be there for, which was cool. But so many stressed and, to be frank, miserable people around in the village. And that was when it really hit me of like, it's not worth going to the Olympics if you didn't enjoy the experience to get there. Like you didn't enjoy the journey. And I realized that I had, and that was worth a medal to me because there was people with silver medals that were really unhappy. And I just did not envy them at all that they had a medal. It was the fact that they weren't happy that it wasn't gold. And that was super interesting to be in that environment. And I think I came like 50th in my race or something, and I was one of the happiest people there. Like obviously I had a different job. I wasn't there to win a medal, but I was there as a support rider for other riders. But it was still a very fascinating experience to be like, okay, that's just another reminder of having to enjoy the journey. And now when I think back, I probably can't even remember a lot of race days anymore, but I remember the ones that we had the biggest belly laughs. Like, I've had some wonderful teammates over the years, some amazing conversations, like cry laughing, like some of the stuff we used to joke and talk about, and the places we got to go. A lot of those moments come to mind much quicker than even some of the races that I did well in. So yeah, and even the biggest result that I got in my career was a second place, actually, not a win, because it was a very prestigious race. The best part of that day was my mum and dad were there, and then I got to share that with them, because my team, they were happy for me, but they weren't joyfully elated like I was. They were kind of like, it's kind of, we call it the World Championships of the spring. Tour of Flanders is a big race. It's like the pinnacle classic, it was anyway. And it's kind of like everyone kind of wants to win it, even though we have a team plan. It's sometimes a little bit more open, just to give everyone a bit of a chance. And everyone has, their own day, their own journey of that race. And everyone was a little bit down, except for me, because I'd done well. And even the coaches were a bit frustrated and just like, I don't know, just not super duper happy. And I could just feel it that I'd failed because I didn't win, but getting second was also like a massive, massive achievement. And when I saw my mum and dad, they were just beside themselves with happiness and excitement, and actually wouldn't have mattered if I'd come 10th or 20th. Like, they just thought it was a great day, because it's a very cool race. Like, there's a million people that come out to watch that race on the road. So it's just like a whole vibe. It's like Belgium just gets super into it. And yeah, that was the memory. It was being there with my parents, not being on the podium.
How beautiful. And I can just picture that, and I can only imagine what the atmosphere would have been like around there. And you touched on some of these briefly, but I'm interested to hear, what are some key lessons you learned being a professional athlete and through that experience, and potentially how have they shaped your perspective in life outside of being a professional athlete?
Oh, I think there's probably too many to list. The ones that come to mind is that, I don't know, very cliche, but, you have to really learn to listen to your instincts. And cycling is a very instinctual sport. It was interesting because from a very early part of my career, especially this one coach that I've mentioned that was in charge in that early part, he said, "Oh, you've got a great race brain. You understand tactics. You've got a good feel for it." And I really valued that he could see that in me, but then it became almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy and pressure to then be that instinctual athlete. And most of the time I was, but then when I was starting to be put into these leadership roles and these team captain roles, where I wasn't just making decisions in the moment for myself, I was having to make them for the whole team. That was quite difficult to learn how to not just feel and do, but to teach and say. And that was one of my biggest challenges is it's easy. It's not easy, but to be responsible for yourself is one thing, but to be responsible for others is something completely different. And that took me a really long time to learn. And I had some challenges with the team management also around those times of feeling actually a little bit disempowered, even though I was told, you're good at this, you can do it, this is your thing, and here's the hat for it, this is your job now. But then still to be undermined sometimes, it was very frustrating, disempowering, and ultimately a little bit gaslighting. By the end of it, I was questioning if I was actually any good at it. And I finished my career not with a lot of confidence, because there was things happening in my personal life that had kind of brought me down physically. Stress is amazing what it does to your body. But also just some of that team politics came into my inability to race well, because I kind of didn't believe in myself and my abilities anymore. And actually doing race commentary now has really helped because I'm like, yeah, I actually do know what I'm talking about. I get good feedback for it. So fuck you. Sorry, I shouldn't swear on the podcast. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but I think sometimes it's a bit like when you have a conversation with someone and you go, "Oh, I'm not going to say that even though I think it," and then someone else says it and you're like, "Damn, I should have said it first." It's just that feeling that we all have, and it's just learning to trust that it is mostly right or true or at least authentic, and that's really important too. It's not about being right or being um cool or like fitting in. It's about like, well, what do you think? And letting, giving yourself that permission to let the feeling come up and have an opinion, have make a decision for yourself, stand up for yourself, and really learn how to self advocate. And I just don't think that young people are given that opportunity to practice that early on, particularly women. I feel like I really had to learn it the long and hard way. And I think a lot of people do. Ultimately, you learn a lot doing it the long way around, but I felt like that road was a little bit too long sometimes. And um, it's always there. I think you just have to learn to listen to it.
Yeah. And what did that learning journey look like for you? I know if someone goes, "Hey, listen to your gut," I'm like, "My gut, I think, is just telling me I'm hungry at the moment." So yeah,
Yeah.
what did and even you mentioned before that you were told that one of your strengths as an athlete was to be instinctual, and then you started doubting that as you were in particular environments. It almost sounds like you had to relearn to trust your instinct. And I'd love for you to share a bit about that learning journey and what you personally did to be able to reconnect with your gut and your instincts.
Yeah, it's really difficult to do, and it's a process that you just don't get right once, like it's something that you probably ebb and flow with for the rest of your life. So you can learn one lesson plenty of times, don't you worry about that. But I think that with the learning to trust your gut, your instinct, for me personally, I think mental health really plays a big role in that, and learning what your symptoms are, I guess, in your mental health. What what comes up for you? For me, it's like frustration, a little bit of anxiety, definitely a lot of depression, and then there's a lot of physical feelings as well. Like, is your chest burning? Do you feel funny in your skin? Like, what are the sensations? What are you ignoring? What are you putting up with? What's making you feel something? And it's usually what's making you feel bad. And I think we learn, and especially as athletes, you learn to compartmentalize because you have to suffer to do well. And I think that is a really great strength to have as an athlete, but it's sometimes a really bad weakness to have as a person because you learn to ignore the sensations, the bad feelings, sometimes the mental ill health, I should say. So it took me a very long time. And I think the quickest way to get through that is to go to a psychologist or a therapist or a counselor or even a life coach. Everyone has someone different that would work for them. Everyone is different, so sometimes a psychologist isn't the right person for you. It was for me. I've worked with business coaches or life coaches before too, and I think like there's so many great different strategies, and everyone's childhood was different, everyone's life experience is different, everyone's mental health um, spectrum, I guess, is different. So it's just figuring out what do you need, who do you need to show you what your blind spots are and help you relearn what those sensations are telling you.
Yeah, and you touched on a really good point there, and I love to look at it through the lens of your decision to move on from cycling. And I think I don't like using the word retiring for someone when they're still so young, but essentially you retired from professional sports, and it's a really significant life transition. And I feel like for every significant life change, it's almost like an identity needs to die so a new identity can be born. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, how that transition played out for you, and how did you know it was time for you to move on from cycling?
Oh, so a few big questions in there. Number one, I'll say retirement is not a bad word. I think it's actually a positive word. Quitting, that's a negative word. Retirement kind of implies that there was a choice there, that you could, make that decision yourself. So I tend to use that one. It is a big transition though. And I really saw it as an opportunity though, as this time to have some fun again, reinvent myself. I'd already been through a bit actually before I'd even retired from professional cycling. I'd been divorced from a very long-term relationship. That was a very painful process. Ultimately, it was the right thing to do, but it was awful. And I was the one that had to, do the pulling of the plug. So it was, like a super tough time, big identity shift there. Probably a year or so later, finding myself in a same-sex relationship too. That was also a big identity shift. And then figuring out how to retire and why. And actually the pandemic for me was a bit of a catalyst because racing was put on pause for a while. It just gave me that little bit of extra time than an off season would to really reevaluate what my personal values and priorities were. So I sat down a lot. I journaled a lot. I really tried to think about what was important to me and did I miss it? And the answer was not as much as I thought I would. So maybe this is time because I still love it, but I don't love it that way anymore. So, and also I was about 31 when I stopped racing, and that's quite young for an endurance sport. For sure, I had that feeling of unfinished business that I could have been even better if I just stuck it out for a few more years, but I was just mentally a bit done, and the pandemic just kind of accelerated that feeling. And I'm glad actually. It was a really good opportunity for me to reassess and realize that I'm pretty young, and that's actually not a bad thing because I have all this other time to do other cool stuff. So I got to reinvent myself as a 31-year-old, and I actually don't think a lot of people get to do that. I think, lots of people call it lots of different things. The woo-woo people call it Saturn returns, and I don't know, psychologists could call it something else. I buy into all of it. I'm a woo-woo, but I'm also a scientist. I love any perspective that helps you in finding what your container is in how you can think about something. And I think we have these big birthdays, and often 30 is a big birthday of reflection and wondering, geez, am I happy with my life? Because I've still got time to change. And so many people have already done the mandatory uni degree and the career stuff, and they're probably already married. They've probably already got kids and a mortgage, and they're only in their early 30s, and they're mentally still going through that reflection time, but they're kind of stuck and they don't feel like they're allowed to change anything because it's all done. And then I was in my early 30s, free, almost free as anything. And it was so exciting to be like, I can do anything with the knowledge I gained in my 20s. And so I called that year after my last race my gap year, just like you would after you finish school. And to see it like that was really exciting because I could do anything. I got to finish my very long running degree. That took me 12 years to finish, but I finished it. So I'm proud of that. And I got to do fun stuff. I got to ski for the first time since I was a teenager. I got to do dangerous stuff that contractually I wasn't even allowed to do. I got to see my friends and family more. It was more just that freedom in my mind than anything, that I could literally do whatever I wanted before I had to knuckle down again. And I actually didn't let myself commit to anything except for finishing that degree in that 12 months because I knew I needed that time to breathe, to grieve, to rest, to think, to try new things, and just to have some fun.
Yeah, and I love how you said that. And I've heard you mention it in another interview for your gap year. You mentioned that you gave yourself the opportunity to take a break from having to be great. And I
Yeah.
feel like, just focusing on the fun and taking off the pressure to commit to anything is such a beautiful gift you can give yourself. And you touched on the importance of allowing yourself to grieve identities once they're lost. And I think anyone who goes through any significant life transition, whether it's you enter motherhood or you change jobs or anything like that, it's not something we often think about, like needing to grieve. And so I'm interested to hear what your experience was with that. And the timeline for someone to grieve is very unique and individual, but I'd love for you to share a bit about your journey in being able to come to that place of acceptance from that chapter of your life and those previous chapters of your life.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm particularly good at grieving. I don't know if anyone is. Um, but I did try and be intentional about it and just accept that it wasn't going to be linear. I think that's also helpful to just be like, some days are rainy days and some days are sunny days, and it's going to be a mixed bag, and you're just not going to know sometimes when the rainy days are going to hit you, and that eventually they'll pass. So yeah, plenty more cliches and analogies in there, but like that was just like, for me, it was just the gift of time, giving myself that year, giving myself that time off being great, just trying not to like be good at something. Actually, like doing stuff that I wasn't good at is quite liberating. Um, just having a laugh because you're not very good at it, and that's okay. Um, but also, I think sometimes grief can be passive if you let it. And I was also trying not to be passive about it. So some days being guilt-free about doing nothing because that was what I needed that day. Easier said than done. I have a lot of personal guilt that I'm trying to work on. um, but yeah, trying at least to not feel guilty about not being productive, not trying to be in a state of progress, which was a really big transition, I think, more than I realized. But then sometimes also making sure I wasn't too passive, like, okay, who can I talk to, or what can I do, or what can I try? So it was a bit of trial and error as well. And I think that was part of the fun. It was that I could see it as a process that I couldn't win or fail at. I just had to try.
Yeah. And what would your advice be to someone who, as you mentioned before, sometimes we get to our 30s and we feel like things are sort of locked in and this is just going to keep playing out? What would your advice be to someone who's feeling that way, feeling like I'm locked in for something, but they're, taking the time to journal and reconnect with themselves and their guts going, no, this isn't the path that we want to be on? What would your advice be to someone in that situation?
Probably two things. Something I found helpful was thinking about myself in the future. Well, who do I want to be? What do I want my life to look like in 5 years' time, 10, 20? Who do I want to be with? How do I want to be spending my time? What would success look like in those time periods? And even, this is quite a stoic philosophy, like, thinking about your own death, not in a morbid way, but like, how would I want to be remembered? And what would I regret if I didn't do? I think that's helpful. Sometimes even thinking about other people's death. I know that sounds awful, but like, what if one of your family members or loved ones didn't come home tomorrow? What would you regret? And I don't practice that every day, but I do try and practice that quite regularly because it's so helpful and grounding, because you realize that you're just being a bit of a twat sometimes and taking yourself too seriously when you're just like, wow, it doesn't really matter. This is what matters. And number two, I had that in my head. Oh yeah. Number two was, it's a decision. So this movie reference is highly dated now. So I don't know if the new generation will get it, but there was this movie back in the 90s or maybe early 2000s, called Sliding Doors, with Gwyneth Paltrow when she was very young. And the premise of the movie was that this kind of lapse in time where she misses a train, I think it was, something like that, and her whole life is different, and then they do this different version of her life as she'd caught the train. And I just think that's like such a helpful analogy, in that you actually never get that chance. You'll never know what the other pathway of a decision is. Sometimes we can get so paralyzed by making a decision that the worst thing is to not make a decision. Sometimes making the decision, it doesn't matter which way you go. It's the making of the decision that's important, and it's the commitment to then that decision, and not wondering what would have happened if you'd chosen the other thing, because you will never know. You don't get the movie moment where you can go back or have a parallel life. Like, I think we get so worried about, what if it's the wrong decision? What if I'm going to be miserable? What if I'm going to be alone? What if it's the wrong career move? Like, all of these things, and you can get so bogged down in that. And I definitely do. And it's a challenge for me every time, because I love to really think about a decision. But ultimately, it's just a decision. And once you choose, you make the most of that decision. So yeah, those are my two things. Think about who you want to be in the future, and just be okay with the decision you make and commit to it.
That's such wonderful and powerful advice. And so I'm interested, based on that, what does the new future look like for you? Is that something that you've been able to put much thought around, or are you still really enjoying being present in your gap year? Extended gap year.
Oh, what year are we in now? I'm in
I know,
my
right?
third gap year. No, I'm having fun. Yeah, I've had some interesting experiences lately, and I'm really digging into my own power. I think that it's tempting to want to seek guidance and power outside of yourself, and sometimes that's important, whether it be clinical help or spiritual help, or even just some help from your friends or family, to have a little bit of guidance there. But I think ultimately everything comes from you, and just giving yourself that time and space to listen to the inner person, the inner goddess, whatever that is to you. It's really hard to hear what she's trying to say, but it's usually pretty spot on. So that's what I'm really trying to dig into, is my own power, because I know that I am a very powerful person, and sometimes I forget that.
And at the start of the show, I did an intro about you. And so I'm interested to hear from you. What would you like your legacy to be? What would you like people to be saying about Gracie?
Yeah, this is another one. This kind of goes back into that, what would I like my eulogy to be?
Yeah, it sounds morbid, but to your point too, it's actually a really powerful
Yeah.
opportunity for you to recalibrate and wonder, hey, am I on the right track?
Yeah, I want to be someone that people remember as kind and generous and wise and fun, and just didn't let life pass me by. I want to be in life, I want to be all about it, because life is pretty amazing, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
And I feel like you're well on your way to be doing that, and people would say that about you already. And so I'd love to hear for people, if they're sitting here going, I want to live in my life and I want to live a big life, what's a really actionable step you would get someone to do in the next 24 to 48 hours to help empower them to go after that big life for themselves?
For me, I think if there's just something itching you in the back of your mind, it can be so small. Like, I really want to Google this thing about this plant, and I haven't made the time yet because it seems frivolous and not helpful to my work life. Google the thing about the plant in your garden, just learn stuff that you actually wonder about. And I think tapping into that wonder of being a child, I'm really trying to do that, because kids just ask questions and adults don't ask questions as much. And if you have a question in your mind that you'd love to know the answer to, all you have to do is Google it. And it's, and bigger than that, if there's something itching at you, I want to write a book, or I want to travel somewhere, what's holding you back from making that decision? I know some things that are harder to do, easier said than done, but what small step can you take towards that thing that you just can't stop thinking about, even though you try not to think about it too often? It could be as simple as Googling something, even a plane ticket. Yeah, I don't want to talk about things that are very expensive at the moment. Plane tickets are bloody expensive, but just instead of opening Instagram, open Google and see what comes up.
Beautiful advice. It's almost like give yourself permission to seek the answers to the questions you have and to be
Yeah.
curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gracie. I so appreciate your time and for sharing so openly and honestly about your experience. And I know this is just the start of a very exciting chapter in your life too, and you're very much still connected to the cycling world and offering so much value through your commentary. So very much appreciate your time today, and thank you again.
Thanks, Murphy.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of the Actually You Can podcast. I so enjoy having you here, and I hope you've taken away powerful insights and tools that will support you to achieve your high-level results. Now, before you go apply all of this wisdom in your life, I would be so grateful if you are able to leave us a podcast review on the platform that you're listening to, or share this episode with a friend. Your support means that we can help more self-led, high-performing individuals just like you expand what's possible for them. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so please go on and shoot me a note on socials and let me know what you think. You can find me on Instagram at MiffGalloway. Now, go ahead and make those dreams a reality, because actually, you can.